When it comes to the two sides of violin technique, the one that takes the longest to develop, has the most subtleties, and therefore is what you should be focusing on the most, is actually the bow arm. But let's be honest, we don't really want to focus as much on our bow arm as we do our left hand. The left hand is where all the fun is, where all the flashiness is. I mean, nobody sits and listens to the, Paganini concerto so they can go, "Oh yes, the subtleties in the weight distribution of the right hand to make that beautiful sostenuto. Oh, I love it so much." Instead, they're going, "Oh yes, give me more thirds and tenths." So today, I'm going to give the people what they want. I'm Tobias Murphy, and this is Murphy Music Academy. Now, of course, if you want to discover the secrets of violin playing, which in actuality is just standard technique that has been developed and honed and passed down through the generations, but whatever you call it, if you want it, the best way to get it is to work regularly with a competent and knowledgeable private teacher. And what do you know? That is my day job. So if any of you are interested in lessons at Murphy Music Academy, either in person or virtual, then please send an email to admin@murphymusicacademy.org. Link will be in the description below, and of course you can work with either me or my assistant Brian Allen, who you can find in the 2 live streams we have done, and hopefully we will do more of those in the future. And of course, if you like the video, go ahead and like the video. If you really like the video, then you might as well hit subscribe, because you'll probably like my other videos, and this is new, I have merch. Okay, on to the actual content. The first thing you should know about left-hand violin technique, but probably don't, is that anything above the top knuckles is free real estate. I have often spoken on this channel about the importance of placing your fingers more on the pads rather than on the tips. Not only does it help keep you in a more natural hand frame, but if you try to play on the tips, one thing is that your pinky usually ends up turning inward, and that becomes a little bit of a problem. I'm sure you've experienced that, but also it makes your hand more of a claw. It makes everything a lot more tight than if you kept a much more natural shape to your hand and played on the pads. But not only that, it also produces a much more pleasing sound, and if you know what you're doing with your left hand technique, you can be just as articulate, if not more, if you play more on the pads as opposed to the tips. Another advantage to playing on pads instead of tips is, of course, if you're going to be playing in higher positions. If you insist on playing the tips of your fingers in high positions, you're going to force your elbow much farther forward than if you did when you were playing on the pads. Now also I'm able more easily to keep my thumb back here, which helps me in the oh so important leveraging of the fingers in the higher positions, which again, of course, allows my fingers to stay loose and does not actually, if you know what you're doing, limit how dexterous I can be in high positions. Another advantage of playing on the pads of the fingers is that you have a lot more room to mess around with if you want a really thick, sensuous vibrato if you're rolling right here, rather than if you're rolling around right here. Of course, all of this is not to say never play on the tips of your fingers, only play on the pads, because that would be silly, even if I think the default should be going more towards the pads. The point of this is that a mature violinist should be able to play on any part of the finger that is above the top knuckles. Now, when we first start playing, we do want to develop a default. And generally, when you are first teaching young people, or sometimes anyone to play, you actually do want to start out with them playing on the tips, because honestly, this is one of the only ways that they can start to get some decent sound. But after a while, you want to soften and develop their hand into a hand frame that plays mostly on the pads. This will encourage them to be more dexterous and more loose. And you want them to train to have this default for most of their playing. But it is, of course, a default. It doesn't mean that's the only thing you can do. And as you start to play more advanced music, you need to start experimenting with playing on different parts of the fingers. One of the most obvious places that this comes up is when you start learning to do things like 3-octave scales and you have to worry about doing a clean string crossing across 2 different strings, going from 4th finger to 1st finger. Now, if you want that to be clean, you're going to have both fourth finger and first finger down on each of their respective strings for a split second during the string crossing. If you don't do that, you'll often hear either just a random open string play because you were still stuck on the lower string while crossing to the other one and you lifted up your fourth finger too soon, or you'll hear just some extraneous noise and it won't be very clean. In order to do that, you are going to have to get up more on the tips of your fingers to avoid each finger hitting the other string. The difference between pad and tip is the most obvious. However, there are other parts of the finger that you can think about as well, including the ones a little bit further down here. And this is most important for the fourth finger when playing some complicated double stops, most notably thirds. Now, I could try to stay exactly on the tips of my fingers when I'm playing thirds so I don't disturb any other strings, but there are actually some other ways that you can do that that don't involve the hand becoming a claw. Now, I can't actually play this for you right here because I only have a C920 webcam, which I have now attached to my chin rest, which means if I put the bow in place, then it covers up my fingers. So I'm just going to show you what I would do in thirds technique, especially when I'm over here on the G string. Instead of trying to play on the tips of my fingers like that, as you see, which makes my hand a lot tighter, I can actually overskirt my fourth finger like this, a little off the edge of the G string, where it barely skirts by the D string right there. So that actually makes my hand a lot more loose while I am putting the fingers down. And if you get the spacing just right, you can barely not touch the D string, but keep your hand in this very loose and broad curve to most of the fingers, especially the fourth finger. Actually makes playing thirds passages a lot easier, and once you get used to it, feels a lot more natural in the hand. Of course, thirds aren't the only thing that can benefit from this. Things like fingered octaves and possibly many other things you should experiment with can also benefit from expanding your horizons on exactly where you should be putting your fingers on the strings. Now, while I still advocate as a default playing on the pads of your fingers, not limiting yourself to just one spot on the finger where you touch the strings will greatly enhance the limits of your left-hand violin technique. Number 2, the faster you go, the less pressure is required from the fingers onto the strings. Now, I go into this topic a little bit more in detail in this video here. However, that was in respect to just how light of pressure you can get away with generally, not relating to going faster. Also, that video was geared towards more advanced players, while this idea is something you can start to play around with even if you only have a couple years of playing under your belt. The best place to mess around with something like this is just in a basic 2-octave scale. If you're just going to go... Try going a little bit faster, but lessen up the pressure a little bit. Just see how much you can get away with. You maybe even faster. Maybe even faster. Eventually you get to a point where it actually just feels like you're just tapping the strings instead of having to do a full force push down of the string for every single note you play. You see, if we're not careful, we can take what should be just the single motion of bringing the finger to the string, as so, and then playing the note, into several different motions. We have the motion of bringing the finger to the string. We have the motion of pressing the string down. We have the motion of making sure we stabilize the finger so we get a nice clear sound. If we can take all of those things and turn it into one clear, single motion, then our hand is going to be that much more consistent and that much more dexterous. And then if you add to that singular motion that we want to develop in our left hand, the fact that it's actually stability in the finger, not pressure, that makes a clear sound, then the faster we go, the less chance there is for your finger to become unstable, for it to wobble around after it is pressed down the string, which means that you don't actually need to press down the string as hard the faster you go. So, why would you? Number 3, the knuckles should be angled more towards the scroll, not towards the bridge. Now, this may seem like a bit of an odd thing to point out, but I can tell you many times I have seen someone, because they don't quite have the idea on how to leverage their fingers, angle their fingers forward like this. This is especially typical of people that insist on playing mostly on the tips of their fingers. That's that claw hand that I was talking about earlier. What you want is to make sure that your fingers and your knuckles are actually leaning back a little bit more, especially these knuckles here, leaning back a little bit more that way. This will keep your hand at a very nice, even hand frame and also keep the fingers very loose. I don't really have a lot more to say about this other than keep your fingers angled more like this rather than this. Okay? It seems like a very small difference, but if you're having finger dexterity issues, then it's probably something that you may not have even noticed that you're doing, and you might want to check in on. It's something I've done with a few of my students, and it has really helped their hand technique a lot. So I'll just conclude with a bunch of videos of great violinists clearly demonstrating this type of hand position. Number 4, keep your elbow out in front of the violin. Now again, this is another thing that many people do naturally, but especially if you're an adult student or basically anyone over the age of 13, you might have some flexibility issues that make you want to keep your elbow back here. This probably feels a lot better. However, you're going to have a lot of problems with finger dexterity and hand technique if you don't bring your elbow a little bit more forward. This, of course, is completely necessary if you want to play on the lower strings, and actually, believe it or not, is also necessary if you want to play on the E string. A lot of people, because they have to move their elbow forward to play on the lower strings, think that when they get to the E string, they pull their elbow back. Not true. Look at what my finger has to do if I pull my elbow back. And I've seen people, you think this looks silly, I have seen people that just naturally pull their elbow back when they try to play on the E string. When you play in the E string, you also want to bring your elbow forward. This brings the fingers right on top of the string. Makes it so you have a lot more room to move from these bass knuckles, which is proper violin technique, rather than moving from here, where you're kind of cutting off from this knuckle here. Number 5, you can in fact release the hand from the side of the neck. Now, if you go and watch my video on thumb positions, you'll know that there are 3 different major thumb positions that people use. There is the higher thumb position, which is something you see a little bit more in old school players. You have the more lower thumb position, which is just over here, right next to this side of the hand. And then you have the thumb under position, which is the position where if you were to do this way all the time, which very few people do, but some people do play this way, you would naturally not have this part of the hand touching the side of the neck. But for the other 2 positions, it is very common to stabilize the violin with this side of the hand. Now, while there are certainly wrong ways of doing each of those 3 thumb positions, none of them are better than the others. It really depends on who you are as a person, as a player, which one works best for you. Now, that being said, most people either fall with the thumb position, the low thumb position like this, or the higher thumb position like this. Very few people play like this exclusively. And that means that in order to play certain things that are going to require, let's say, some big stretches or need a lot of leveraging from the thumb, you are actually going to have to release the side of the hand here in order to both expand the range of the hand or to get a really good leveraging for a wide vibrato. In fact, it is very rare to find a great player whose thumb stays in the same place all the time while they're playing. And of course, while experience will be the thing that teaches you the most about how to do this best for you, one of the things I've found that works the best is to realize, and this goes back to point 4, just a tiny movement forward of the elbow allows me to just release the side of the hand and get the leverage of the thumb up into the neck. Now, I'll show you what this looks like from the back. It's actually a very small motion. So I have the thumb here, and then I can just move the thumb there, and I can play anything I want to here, which for more fast, dexterous passages, things like that, I'm going to want the added stability of having the side of the hand here. But if I want some really good vibrato on something, I will immediately just very easily shift the hand this way so I can get the thumb underneath, leverage the finger, and engage in some very nice vibrato. And it's very easy for me to get right back because you don't actually have to get this far out. You just have to get a little bit there. You can reduce the friction here. You can easily stretch a lot more if that becomes necessary. So it's actually very important for a violinist to develop maybe 2 different hand positions or thumb positions that they can switch between. Anyway, I have been Tobias Murphy for Murphy Music Academy, hoping that this list of things that you probably didn't know about left-hand violin technique but should will help you in your pursuit of excellence, because remember, of course, there is no pleasure in mediocrity. I've been Tobias Murphy for Murphy Music Academy. Happy practicing, and see you next time.